Well, whenever you're ready.
Oh, okay. I've retired, and during this long pandemic, when everybody else is retired, I have been feeling time differently. And as perhaps all of you have, wondering what to do with time, this gift of time. And I found that I have been less distracted, more focused on the time that is given me. And so I've decided to memorize some poetry. I thought that would be a good use of my time and also of my memory, because at 80, one starts to wonder and worry a little bit about losing memory. So, what better way to get a purchase on this important idea of mine, which has always been my going back into memory, to do some memorizing, which I don't think I have ever done. So I started with, and I finished with Yeats. I don't think I'm going to do this project anymore. It was called the Yeats Project. Why Yeats? Well, he's a Celtic poet of the 20th century, and the 20th century, late 20th century is my area. He's Irish, which fits my mentality and my imagination beautifully. He's a Nobel Prize laureate, which doesn't make any difference to me one way or the other. But he is talking, I think, about some of the issues we're facing in this pandemic and with the horrors that Trump has given us, which actually come out of our history. And I think Yeats is well aware when he writes his poem, which I will recite, called The Second Coming. He is also aware that World War I, which was his time frame, didn't come out of nothing. Things come out of something. And I was struck as I was working with The Second Coming and some of other poems of Yeats, how he reflects upon something perhaps the history doesn't always teach us, that there is a recursive factor to history and to time. Time can go backwards. That's the importance of memory. And the backwards step that we take in the recursive movement is all important to what I have been doing in career, thanks to William Pinar's theories of the backward recursive movement that we must take if we're going to understand the present. So here is Yeats's amazing poem called The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed. And everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lacked all convictions, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. No sooner are those words out than a vast image out of Spiritu Mundus startles my thought. Somewhere in the vast sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze cold and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs. And all about it, reel the shadows of the indignant desert birds. darkness drops again. But now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, is moving sloth toward Bethlehem. That's more or less the poem.
Nice. That was incredible. That was really beautiful.
it is, and one of the things I admire about Yeats is that he doesn't shy from repetition, because I think repetition is one of his themes, and the lines of the poem repeat, and you might say to yourself, surely he should find better words than repeating.
Right. But they mean something different every time they repeat.
And it's an emphasis on the meaning of repetition, that we don't think that things move in a linear fashion. If we think that, we're kind of stuck, and we have forgotten who we are in memory. So he repeats the second coming, hardly are those words out. And then he repeats again. I can't quite remember where. And the words sometimes are punning. He uses the word real. I think I didn't mention that line. I think I blanked on that line. The eyes of the beast are blank and pitiless as the sun. And I think I forgot the line. It's moving in slow thighs. Well, all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert birds, or perhaps I did say that.
Yeah, I think you said that.
I think I said that. The pun is the word real. And it's written as the verb to reel, to wind,
right.
And to turn as the gyre turns. And the idea is that we are circular more than we are linear.
Right.
And the pun at the end of the poem, real shadows, means both, to return to the opening line, of turning and turning in the gyre, which is a symbol for turning. And it's also the shadows are real. The shadows of the indignant desert birds are real in terms of literal, but they are real also in terms of they offer us what lies in the shadows. And we are perhaps often living in the shadows of our own imaginations and our own consciousness. And the real shadows are real. We have to explore them. I always used to think that my shadow was behind me, but I keep forgetting it's also in front of me.
Right.
So you can see my shadow, the dark places of myself, they become aware to you and more than to me. But then I also see my own shadow in the morning when the sun's behind me.
Right.
And I'm picking up dog poop. Which I do every morning.
Right.
I'm getting real good at this.
It's very humbling, isn't it?
Well, it is. And I don't have any problems with my memory because I know where they do. They think they can hide from me.
No.
I know where to look.
Right.
Shadows, and they're the real shadows. They have some dignity, these dogs. So this poem of Yeats is, the words are so wonderful, and it's a third stanza when he talks about the 20 centuries of stony sleep. And historians, where are you? Do you think that everything just moves linearly? I think it's the literature professors, if you don't mind my saying so, that have greater insight into what the wise people of our culture, always the poets,
Hmm.
always the ones who delve deeply into their own consciousness. I think it's the poets who tell us quite a bit more about the past times and how we tend to forget and think we're moving on and we're moving up and we're moving better.
Hmm.
And of course, archetypal psychology, which I'm also interested in, and James Hillman, which I'm also, he's a post-archetypal psychologist, reminds us that things need to go down. And it's in the shadows and the dark. And of course, Bill Piner, who wrote his major work, I think, What is Curriculum Theory? When he wrote his major work in 1976, I think, 72. And then 4 years later, James Hillman comes along and neither one knows the other. And James Hillman is writing about reimagining psychology. And you have to imagine that it's not the Piaget idea of psychology at all. It's archetypal and it has to do with not the brain, but the soul. And
Mm.
that's the hidden darkness, which can be found in our dark moments, the dark moments of the soul and the dreams and the forgotten material and the poets.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, Not the promises that we find in the prologue, preamble to the Constitution. I began my memory work by memorizing the preamble to the Constitution.
Okay, we all got to start there. It's our founding document, right?
The founding document, and I was so impressed with the member of the Trump committee,
Oh, Jamie Raskin?
Raskin,
Yeah.
Jamie Raskin,
Constitutional scholar.
Who-
He had it memorized.
who memorized it for us.
Yeah.
And I just went, wow. Well,
Right.
pardon me, it's only 8 lines, but I still was very impressed that he would begin talking about the horrors of Trump, who, by the way, is the sloucher toward Bethlehem, right?
Beast.
Right. Right.
The slouching beast. I just thought immediately when I was reading that poem
Hmm.
of the slouch
Hmm.
and how he has, quite by accident, I think, picked up on all of our past histories that where the resentment of the white man is so prevalent. But let's go back to Jamie Raskin, who memorized the preamble. And it's been a while since I've memorized the preamble, but I remember thinking of the smugness of the words of the Constitution that will be forever providing liberty for us and our posterity, for us men and our posterity. And just who are the men?
Hmm.
The unconscious whiteness coming into the very preamble of the Constitution.
Hmm.
And when I read those rhymes, which I I've sort of forgotten, liberty. He's talks about we the people, but the people are ourselves, the speakers, the white men with the wigs, and the slaves.
Hmm.
We the people. No, those are not the people. No, those are just the privileged people. We the people for ourselves and our posterity. And I thought, how interesting that these well-meaning white men just simply dismiss the brown, the black, the yellow, and the red
Hmm.
that make up who we are. And that,
And the women.
oh, thank you. Thank you very much. The women. And then how happy they were to, a century later, a half a century later, to proclaim the beautiful phrase manifest destiny. What a beautiful phrase.
Yeah,
Think again. What does
right.
that phrase mean? Cut down all the trees, make your way west, and while you're at it, let's just dismiss all the people who are brown skinned in Mexico and proclaim our lands away from Mexico. And it's such an unconscious praise to the governing bodies of the American people.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot there. As you were talking about memory and circling back into history, into ourselves,
Yes.
that our lives are more circular than we imagine.
Yes.
I can't help but think how much the university has been a one of the major proponents of this linear kind of thinking, right? And some would even put it back to writing itself, that prior to writing, the reason to share culture or share stories or share knowledge was to pass on what to the next generation, right? And so it becomes a circular kind of thing. And once you write it, what's that?
It could be good or bad.
Could be good or bad. Yeah, absolutely.
On the generational knowledge.
Absolutely. But nonetheless, it's a recognition of the circular nature of people.
Yes.
But yeah, it certainly can be good or bad.
Well, I was just thinking of the line in one of the musicals that my mother took me to. Was it? It wasn't Kiss Me Kate. Maybe it was da, 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 da. That one.
Oh, what a beautiful morning.
Oh,
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, and that maybe.
Okay.
And it was you've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught. To hate the people your grandparents hate, you've got to be carefully taught.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, what a great line.
In a musical.
Yeah, yeah.
Even back then.
Yeah.
Musicals today are really profound. They're taking on all the issues.
Right.
They really are.
Yeah, and I think most plays and art in general are always, there's something that they're playing with, that they're toying with, that they're trying to pull out
and question.
And question, yeah.
Question. And yes, going back to family stories, I am a child who did not grow up with family stories, really. My mother left the house early. I was born in 1940. She left in 1944, the unforgivable thing, to leave the family and go pursue her own career. That was the absolutely unforgivable thing. And she never was willing to share with me her memories. My father didn't share his memories with me because I was the girl child. I'm the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And let's keep it that way, nice and gold and shiny. Whereas my brother got a lot of the memories.
Yeah.
Memory is an important issue for me.
Right. So he didn't treat you as an agent. He treated you as an object of sorts.
Precisely so. The pot of gold. And I was told to stay as sweet as you are.
Smile pretty.
Right. And try not to interrupt.
Right.
And if you can just listen, that would be good. And my mother, I noticed when we were in company, she would say very little. And I would look to her as a woman who was in the world as an editor. She certainly had lots of things to say about writing and the world of publishing, but she didn't. She did not.
So when she left, did you see her after that?
Oh yes, there was an arrangement. Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks, okay.
My brother and I took the train and we changed seats at the North White Plains station because that's when the engines changed. And whoever was by the window had to give it up and go on the aisle seat. And whoever was in the aisle seat had to give it up and go to window seat. But one time when the arrangement was made, I had annoyed my brother. So when he changed from the window to this aisle, he said, "I'm leaving. Goodbye."
Oh, really?
No, don't leave me.
Oh, geez. How often would he do that?
Oh, he did it once, but then he would torment me all week while we're waiting for the arrangement. He would say, if I displeased him, he'd whisper, "I'll get you later."
That's funny.
It is funny. And he also said, it terrified me. He said, "If you don't watch out, Tracy Wright, who's about 5 years younger than me, is going to grow up and be older than you." No.
That would be terrible.
I'm so immature.
So how did you, this is a big question though, like how did you find your voice? Because obviously you have a lot to say now and you're very confident in it, and people hang on your words.
Oh my, I thank you. How did I find? Well, all this affirmation from the curriculum scholars, that
Mm,
whole field, Marla, of course,
mm,
and Bergamo in the old days. Oh, it was just wonderful. And we loved each other and we loved our words and the things that we were doing. And I
mm.
thank you for the question, because I think that a long time coming was where I felt affirmed and
Hmm.
I had something to offer. And I think that's probably what it,
So when did you start going to Bergamo?
way back.
Like when? Do you remember?
Yes, I do. I remember it was when they were at the Janet would know this, Airlie, one of the early conferences after Rochester. Perhaps the next one was Airlie, and that was outside of Washington, D.C. And we shared the space with the CIA.
You were watching them, they were watching you.
Yeah, oh yeah, we were. And we had a little tiny room where we could socialize. And I just loved it. I loved it. We were packed into the small room. It was just us. It wasn't them.
How
And,
many people were there at this time?
uh,
I wasn't there.
Sorry, like,
no, I'm looking at your books. Maybe 70.
okay.
And the bar was fabulous because it was packed. And so many people, they were so talking to each other. We were shoulder to shoulder, and it was just great. And Bill Dahl did not go because it was too raucous. But I did. I went raucous. But yet I gave my first talk, and it was based off of my work with angels. And in graduate school, I was in graduate school at that time.
Right.
And I wanted to sort of talk about the how Virgin Mary was so pure that I couldn't really relate to her at all. She was so pure, and those down eyes going down, and she was dressed in that pale blue thing. And I was Catholic at the time, and I was sort of mocking the images of the Virgin Mary. And I realized now, Fran Crawl, I think it was. Flo Crawl.
Yeah.
I think it was. Walked out in dismay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You mean the ecology person?
Well, I think it was her. You would be surprised, wouldn't you? But maybe she was Catholic too.
Right. That's so interesting.
So I became a devout Catholic, but always with my left eye open.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I write about the left eye. I dream about the left eye. I consider myself out in left field. And I think that's a good place to be.
Right.
Perfect for curriculum theory.
It's a good place
The
to
more out
be.
left field you are, the more we welcome you.
Right.
I think it's a good place to be.
Well, you see some interesting things out there, things other people don't see, that's for sure.
Well, I think you know this too, Dan, you and Marla both. It's good to be on the circumference, the margin.
Mm,
For an early part of my life, I was in the center because I was innocent, ignorant, and childish.
hmm
And I didn't know how privileged I was. I'm a child of privilege. But it was only when I could move to the circumference and feel marginalized by my growing belief that things were wrong,
hmm
that the poets that I loved were not being welcomed enough, that I think I began to think of myself as the left hand of darkness. Wasn't that Ursula Le Guin? Yeah, I can't read her, by the way. I don't like her work, but I like that saying.
Yeah. And there's oh geez, Michael Lerner has The Left Hand of God,
Love it.
which is nice. But he's being more political with that. He's trying to say that there's a left way of reading God. It's not just owned by the conservatives. But
I'll buy that too, sure. I think that's very good.
yeah.
And I think for my mother, although I didn't know her very well, I probably learned to be a little bit disobedient. And
Mm-hmm.
she disobeyed the vows of her marriage. She disobeyed the privileges of her upbringing, and she disobeyed the dicta of her culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little bit disobedient when I went to graduate school, had a great time. I didn't fail anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to know.
Because I failed plenty I failed plenty in high school, in college.
Undergrad?
You knew that, right?
And I didn't know that. No.
Oh, I did. My father died and then I failed.
Okay.
But
So where did you go?
went to a place that I wasn't happy in, Connecticut College. At that time,
Okay.
it was called Connecticut College for Women. And my classmates were debutantes.
Oh, right.
And one of my classmates was Joanne Levitt, whose father was Levittown in New Jersey.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It was Levittown in New Jersey. I didn't
Wasn't
know.
it?
I thought it was like outside of New York somewhere, but that could be New Jersey.
Well,
Sure.
I think it could have been yes, it could have been Long Island.
Right. Yeah.
But
Where I was thinking of.
her name was Joanne Levitt, and
Okay.
I knew immediately, oh, these are not my people.
Right. That's so interesting that you had this identity as an outsider, even though you were born well inside.
Isn't that true? I think of the
Mhm.
same thing. I was the most popular girl in high school. I could have gone on and led their I was already appointed to this, that, and the other thing. I was on cheerleader, blah, blah, blah. Very popular. And I was in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And then my father sent me away because there was too much drinking in the house.
And he was doing it. No, I don't know.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. His
Yeah.
study was next to mine.
Right.
And I was taking care of him one summer when my stepmother and my stepsister went to Wales. I was 15, and my study was next to his study, and I taught myself how to type. But I could hear him going from his study to the kitchen, and I could hear pouring going into the glass and the tinkle of the ice cubes. And he would do this 3, 5, 8 times. At which point I got up and I followed him into the kitchen and I looked him square in the eyes and I poured that bottle upside down.
Oh, wow. And you were 15,
Yes.
standing up to your father. Wow.
Yes. The pot of gold
Yeah.
turned to dross.
Was that one of your first big rebellious acts for
I
him?
think so, Dan.
Yeah.
I think so.
How did he respond?
With shame.
Yeah.
And it was just the two of us in the house.
Right.
And I didn't drive. I don't think I drove yet. Maybe I
What
did.
kind of what kind of drunk was he? Was he
Oh, he just fell asleep.
okay.
And so I was always embarrassed to go on a date, because if he didn't pull the curtains, they would see this man asleep in the front living room.
Right, right, right.
Oh, he also had a habit. Oh, this is funny. He had a habit of gardening in the nude.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wait, Chappaqua.
In Chappaqua.
Chappaqua.
Bill and Hillary
Right.
like to come.
And
Right.
we didn't have tall trees or fences or anything.
No, right.
Yeah,
That's
you'd get arrested
hilarious.
for that, wouldn't you? In decency?
Well, he's on his own property. And he would wheel the wheelbarrow over the lawn to his, he had poplar trees surrounding his little sacred place, but he would be naked except for his shoes. And he would
Aren't people wonderful?
people are wonderful.
But
Yes.
really, wouldn't you be arrested today for that? Well, maybe
Depends how
not
much
now.
land you have, maybe how close you are from the nearest person who will see you.
So the only nightmares I had was of him, someone seeing my father.
Right, 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 right.
But anyway, he and I were very close. And when he died, I had a breakdown, although I didn't know it.
Yeah. So he died while you were in undergrad.
I was a freshman,
Wow.
and he died a year after my stepmother died. So
Wow.
I was unmoored.
Yeah.
And
Were you close with your stepmother?
Yes,
Yeah.
she was a lot of fun. She too was a drunk,
Right, right.
but she was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And when my father died, I was left rootless,
I
because
bet.
my mother had her career and her life in Santa Fe, and my brother was busy with his graduate studies. And here I was stuck on the East Coast with people I didn't like, these debutantes.
Yeah. And I guess as
So
a
I flunked.
freshman trying to deal with all this and seeing their superficiality, you're just like,
Thank you, Dan.
come on, people, get real.
They didn't have the skills in those days.
No.
If you call it a skill, they weren't trained to look for the child who was left behind.
Right, right. No, they weren't. They weren't at all.
We were, and if you didn't make it, and you certainly, and I certainly didn't that freshman year. In fact, I flunked 2 courses. You were just told to go to the library and study harder.
Mm-hmm.
I did. I went to the library.
That's good.
Study.
I mean, did
No,
you
no.
find it? No. I was wondering, oh, you found your love of poetry there or something. No, just
I
like,
did actually.
yeah.
Not there, but in the back of the room in one of my classes, I found the love of Shakespeare.
Mm.
Only because he read a passage out loud, and then he asked us to write about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a perfect assignment.
Mm-hmm.
I've used it in all my classes since then.
Mm-hmm.
Find a passage that you like. Maybe I would read something and then write on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I did. I wrote on it, and I discovered things.
Mm.
And I had never, I lost all that surface agony.
Right, right.
And I went into the text, and it was Shakespeare. And for years and years, I couldn't remember what the passage was until last month, when I suddenly remembered the word Pontic. It's the sea. They used to call the Black Sea the Pontic Sea. And it was Act 3, Scene 3 of Othello.
Okay.
So I went back, in a piece I recently wrote. Was that for you? Not for you? I wrote a piece recently on that,
On the word Pontic.
on the Pontic Sea passage in
Yeah.
Shakespeare,
Yeah.
and how that awakened in me a skill that I didn't know I had, to read closely and to interpret.
Right.
And to interpret not just the text, but the supertext and the subtext, and what was happening with me. The Pontic Sea is an icy cold sea.
Right.
And they were comparing it to Othello, who was determined to murder his wife at that point. And his determination that he wouldn't turn back so impressed me, because I didn't have any determination. I had no idea of who I was or what I was doing, but Othello did. He was going to murder Desdemona.
Right.
And it was so interesting how he psychologically, Shakespeare has him psychologically understand his anger and his outside status, because he was the black man, the Moor in the white society.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all this outsideness, I think, awakened in me something.
Nice. And when was that? Was that your freshman year, or was that your?
It was the year I flunked.
Yeah.
And I only got a C in the Shakespeare course.
Well, at
But
least you didn't flunk.
yeah. And then I had to make up all these hours and hours, anything below a B at graduate school, Johns Hopkins. I went to them for my master's. All my C's, D's, and F's, I had to make up. They had
Oh, right.
A's and B's.
Oh, geez.
But for some reason, I did it.
Yeah.
And
you finished your undergrad at Connecticut College? You went there for 4 years, or you were done with them?
I tried to transfer, but I didn't have the grades.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I wanted to go to NYU.
Right, right. Well, that might have been a dangerous place for you.
I think I would have awakened real quick.
Yeah. I always think if I went to NYU at 18, by about 29, I'd be getting out of the methadone clinic.
Oh, you're so right. We don't know what we're doing.
Right. I mean, it was just so much around, so much
We don't know.
stimulation to follow. Yeah.
You're so right. It's just a blessing that I could just, bear it out, just go on and do those unbearable 4 years. But I learned stuff.
So how did you get into curriculum studies?
By being an outsider.
I know, but like how did you meet people?
Oh,
and all that?
so that you asked me, the first Bergamo I went to was at Airlie.
Yeah, and then you met Bill, or what?
And Bill Doll had known Bill Piner before. And Bill Piner I gave my presentation with Bill Piner.
Oh.
And then he lived in Rochester and we lived in Syracuse. Bill and I befriended each other immediately.
Oh, great.
He came to our house in Fulton, and he writes about it in his piece that he wrote for me in my book. They did a book on my work, and it's coming out, who knows, next year maybe. And Bill remembered meeting me and enjoying looking out the window. And I was commenting how I loved November because it was a dark month. And he couldn't understand why anybody would like November in upstate New York, because all it meant was snow.
Right.
And at the time, he he was physically uncomfortable in the cold. And he would go to Florida, but he couldn't stand Florida either. And I love the cold, and I love the dismal, dark skies of upstate New York. And I think that's my Scottish background. I think I could give a salute to my Scottish background. So
you married Bill Doll. You meet him where, when, and then from that you meet Bill Piner?
Right. It was an arranged marriage in some way. I was teaching in Maryland, and my headmaster was a headmaster of Bill Doll, who was, I mean, they were two headmasters in these schools. And the Valley School, which is where Bill Doll was, he was the headmaster of the Valley School. And my headmaster was the headmaster of Garrison Forest School for girls, where I taught for 2 years or so.
Okay.
And the two headmasters got together and said, you should marry Mary Aswell.
Oh, wow.
And then she'll stay here in Maryland because we think she's so great.
Yeah. That's what happened, right?
Little did I know.
Yeah.
And then we moved and went to I taught at Washington, D.C. in the Sidwell Friends School. So the plot didn't work. It was a failed plot on the part of my headmaster, but it worked for Bill Doll.
Is that where all the president's kids go, Sidwell Friends School?
Yes, that's right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So, well, that must have been an interesting place to teach as well. So
it was Quaker. They were socially concerned. It was cosmopolitan. Is that a good word? And the kids were great. And I still have the book that one student, his name was Tom something, and he was so appreciative of my teaching that year, 10th grade English, that he gave me a big copy of Dante's Inferno. We have it still. It's a thing that's difficult to travel from wherever you're going, but I always kept it. Beautiful engravings by the famous engraver. August. See, remember?
During. I have no idea who a famous engraver is.
Doré. Gustave
Doré.
He did the engravings of all the major works, including the Aesop's Fables and the Bible. I mean, he did the engravings. And this book contained the engravings by Gustave Doré, which are absolutely spectacular.
So then, so Bill Doll, you meet Bill Pinar at this conference in Syracuse.
Well, it was a conference in outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay, the conference was outside of Washington, D.C. And right at this point, you're considering yourself what? Not a curriculum scholar. You're considering yourself a teacher, someone who's interested in myth and poetry.
That's right. And enjoying very much my new, I'm getting a grip on myself.
Yeah.
And I then go to graduate school.
For what?
Interdisciplinary studies.
Oh, perfect.
Couldn't find a job.
Well, there's that.
I mean, I wrote back to them when I graduated and I said, this degree is worthless.
Well, you learned a lot, I'm sure.
Oh, I did. Oh my Lord, I did. And that was where I first disobeyed. Perhaps I was circling back to where I became disobedient. And we were told not to write a dissertation on Samuel Beckett because it's been done.
Right.
And you can't possibly do it.
Yeah.
I said, oh, okay, I think I'll try it.
Right.
My first book.
Nice.
From Syracuse University Press, no less.
Perfect.
The reason they asked me to submit my manuscript was that they saw I had a PhD in and studying in interdisciplinary studies, and I wrote my dissertation on Beckett and myth. And so they said, well, maybe you could read some of the manuscripts that were coming with on Beckett. So I read them and I didn't like them. And I wrote pages as to why I didn't like them. And then they said, well, would you have a manuscript? And I said, oh.
I have a dissertation.
It's the third drawer in my desk. Pulled out the third drawer. There were these piles of papers. It was my dissertation.
Right.
And I.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, you had to rework it, I'm sure.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes. And I wanted to get photographs of Mr. Beckett because I call him Mr. Beckett, Sam Beckett.
Hmm.
I put this photograph on the cover,
Okay.
and I got the photograph myself. I got permission from John Hayes. I called him up from California to London on the phone. And he said, "Oh, yes. Oh, on Beckett. Yes, I have the photograph. Oh, wait. Would you hold the line a minute? I've got a cab waiting for me. I have to pay." So I held the line, and he came back, and I said, "Oh, yes. Beckett, was it? A photograph? Yes. Which one was it? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm short some change. I have to go back and give him some. Would you hold the line a minute?" So I don't know how much this call cost me.
Right, right.
It was worth every penny because I got permission for his magnificent photograph of
Yeah,
his shades.
yeah. It's a
And
powerful image, isn't it?
it's a powerful image. And then I found all these other images in the British Museum of mythic characters or Beckett plays with eyes blotted out.
Oh, okay, interesting.
That's Ham. He's blind
Yeah.
and he's got glasses on. And here's an early image of a heart-shaped mouth and those black eyes of an early figure from the British Museum, a tragic mask.
Okay.
And I liked what, and then of course the Beckett photograph. And that was
Right.
my first publication.
Nice.
Thank you. And I love the Beckett people because they were big drinkers. They loved their Irish whiskey, and we were all together when Beckett died
Mm.
at a conference. And we all went down to the pub and raised several glasses
Hmm.
to Sam, who himself was a big drinker of
Right, right.
Irish whiskey. And at the time, I was drinking scotch, but it fit in quite nicely.
Well,
And
it was fortunate that you were there with those people,
yes,
that you could appropriately
thank you.
mourn and say
Yes.
goodbye or
Oh, we were with people who knew him.
hmm.
I didn't know him. I carried his address around in my pocket, but I was too shy to actually call on him
Where did he live?
in Paris.
Okay.
When I went to Paris, I had his address in my pocket, but he would have been, I think, very kind. He was a very kind man. And his work absolutely spoke to me.
Mm.
Absolutely. And of course, I did the mythic thing because I had one of my specialties is mythology.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I could trace many of the mythic references in his work, which is
Hmm.
what this book was about.
So then you meet Pinar, and that was after your PhD work,
Uh, mm, um,
or
yes,
maybe
it was.
somewhere
Yeah, I think it
around the
was
same time.
around the same time. He was clearly influential in
Yeah.
my writing, so I'm sure my interest in the failing better, which is what Beckett is famous for saying, you must fail better,
Right, right.
is part of that regressive movement where you just don't go with the program, don't go with all the sun things that they tell you about. Think deeper, go to your deep heart's core. Bill never said
Hmm.
that, but Yeats did. The deep heart's core, which is
Right.
cannot be touched by the curriculum, but it will touch you if you can offer it to the curriculum, the deep heart's core.
Mm. And so you all ended up in LSU together at some point. How did
We
that?
did in
There are a
Louisiana.
lot of steps in between, or you kind of?
A lot of steps in between because Bill and I left to go for California, the land of sunshine
Okay.
and health, and I hated it.
Not enough gloomy skies.
Oh,
It was never gloomy
oh.
there.
And
Yeah.
one of Beckett's plays is called, oh dear, she's stuck in the sand dunes, and she says, she wakes up and she said, oh, it's called Happy Days, and she wakes up and she says, another heavenly day, and she's stuck in a sand pile.
Sounds like Eraserhead.
Yeah.
It's highly ironic and
Yeah.
funnier than funny. All funny, funny, funny. And his humor is highly Irish. He has disrespect for most things,
Right.
except his friends
Mm.
and except for prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
He had a great love for prisoners, and word has it that he tried out Waiting for Godot on San Quentin prisoners,
Oh, is that right?
and their acting was superb. One of the best
Yeah.
productions of Waiting for Godot that you can ever imagine.
Right. Right.
And then one of the prompters came to the mothers after the production and said to them, not realizing who they were, well, do you see the importance of the title Waiting for Godot? And one of the mothers stood up and said, who knows better than we do what it is to wait?
Yeah. I mean, they that in that setting, that play,
Right. San Quentin,
very powerful.
powerful play. And he always had a great fondness for tramps, the
Mm-hmm.
untrodden, prisoners wrongly imprisoned,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which I think is, it comes through in his work because
Mm-hmm.
it's got the Irish humor, but it also has the deep love for things that we don't normally think about loving. His Christmas card one year was deep love in my heart for stones.
Nice. So, when do you start identifying as a curriculum scholar?
um, good question. I think,
Or do you identify? Of course
oh,
you do.
yes, who else has embraced me?
Yeah. Well,
Who else sees something in my work and has given me the courage to say I have work?
right, right, right.
Because I never knew how to answer that question. What are you working on?
Right.
Mhm.
Well, it is a strange question, isn't it?
What is your work?
Yeah.
And I didn't have any work, but my work has subsequently been in obviously in literature and making connections with what Yeats calls the deep heart's core, and that's the title of one of my books. Not really, is the
Right, right,
Black Letters in Running Water, and the running water is a career,
right.
and it's this images of soul and the writers that I like so much, especially Richard Wright and Eudora Welty. And these are two of my fathers. My father and my mother were both editors.
Mm-hmm.
My mother, the editor of Eudora Welty, and my father, the editor of Richard Wright.
Amazing.
And it is interesting because neither writer at the time, well, Richard Wright was famous for Black Boy. And
Mhm.
recently they've found his unpublished manuscript called The Man Who Lives Underground. And I just finished reading it. It just came out. His daughter found the manuscript and they just released it last month.
Wow.
And they didn't publish The Man Who Lives Underground because they thought the scenes of police brutality were too graphic
Wow.
and the public wouldn't stand for it.
Yeah.
So my father was one of the ones who felt that it was too strong. But what could be stronger than Native Son when he pushes his uh, his
Right.
he pushes his he's the chauffeur in this very rich house, and he pushes the father in the house, his daughter, into the firing to the
Yeah.
furnace.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny because he can't get the shoulders in, and
Yeah.
he can't get the head in. And it's very graphic and desperate. And we're rooting for him all the time because he murdered her by mistake and he has to leave.
Right.
You read it?
Yeah, a long time ago. Long time ago. So those details are a bit lost on me, and I read it on my own, so not with a class.
I was going to ask you, how
Yeah.
did you come across it?
Native Son.
On, wonderful.
I think it was just it was referred to a lot in
Yeah,
classes and things I was reading, and so I picked it up and read it myself.
yeah,
Probably soon after I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I was
yes,
just becoming more interested in the Black authors of the 20th century.
right, good,
Hmm.
very good. So
So,
I write about them a little bit in here, and then I think the book I'm proudest about in some ways is The More of Myth,
oh, right, okay.
The Pedagogy of Diversion, because I think mythology uh, offers us a sense of history, a sense of religion as understood by nature worship, uh,
Mm,
a sense of the power of females in many of the myths,
hmm.
and so many of the understories.
And there's a connective tissue there too between the myths around the world, where you can begin to see the dream world and understand it for yourself in some ways,
Thank you.
of someone else who's in a different time and different place than you.
Yes, the dream world, so much a part of the early myths, not just Greek, but I had to teach a course in world myth.
Mm.
And Marla remembers my getting up at 3 a.m. to try and figure out what all this meant. World,
World myth. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking China and Tokyo and Japan
Yeah.
and South
Wow.
America. And my students come from China and South America and Africa. And
So you can't be,
I'm
that's a
teaching.
big responsibility.
I took it seriously, too seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Who else at Bergamo did you really? Who were you influenced by at Bergamo?
Janet Miller. I didn't know Brian in those early years, Brian Casemore.
He wasn't there.
No, not in the early.
He came after me.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, but he certainly is a friend now. But Janet Miller and they're dead. Those people, they're so dead.
They're so dead.
And I can't
No,
remember.
I didn't know there were gradations of dead.
Dead, then you're really dead.
I can't Ron something, and Bill Piner would remember
Wrong something.
Ron,
Oh, that's before my
because
time.
Ron was a Jungian also.
Okay.
And I found these Jungians in Bergamo,
Mm.
and Richard Pippin a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
Toby later, quite a bit later.
Despot poet.
Mm-hmm.
And these are wonderful people. Oh, and the one who Peter Taubman and Ron, whose name I'm forgetting because he wrote things. He was the University of Arizona, and there were a lot of people from the University of Arizona, Tempe, that were
Oh, really?
dear.
That was a curriculum studies place back in the day.
Yes, and then Kathleen Kesson back in the day. Oh, Madeline, but she was too famous for me. She was rather distant
Mm-hmm.
for me.
That's Madeline Gourmet.
Madeline, distant. She was one of the stars.
Yeah, we have our superstars in the field, that's for sure.
There aren't any more, you say?
Well, it feels like there were the sort of the founding fathers and mothers, and then the rest of us. I mean,
I think you're right. I feel that too.
Right. I mean, I know Marla talks about the next generation, her generation being lost, but I feel like almost everybody after Bill Pinar
Yeah,
Madeleine Gourmet,
yeah.
um,
Janet left.
yeah,
Bill Dahl continued after the divorce. He continued to
Peter McLaren and
Yes,
Henry Giroux. You know, it's like those people back in the 70s
right.
Yeah,
are still with us.
and that's an interesting word that she used, lost. Like we are a lost generation.
Hmm.
And I feel the same. Like we were overshadowed by these giants, to use your phrase, overshadowed by the giants.
And they didn't sit with us.
I just frankly don't know what to do about it, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this genealogy project, so we wouldn't
Right.
be in the lost generation.
That's so good.
But do you think that the newer generation is not like they're getting a shine that your generation didn't get?
I think they're lost as well.
Yeah.
I don't have the feeling, like those superstars were, some of them are still around obviously, and they still are superstars, and then we're the lost generations, plural.
Mm.
I don't feel like that time ever will be again. I
No.
don't know who today would be considered a Madeline Gourmet or a
Right.
or a, I don't know what all of that means really.
Well, that brings up an interesting question, right? One, does our future rely on having, all stars,
Maybe
the
not.
future of the field? Maybe not.
Maybe not.
And but then the other question is also, is there a future in the field if all we do is look back and not really look at each other as seriously as perhaps we should?
Right, and that's a very good question, because no, if all we do is look back, that's the end. We need to look forward,
Mhm.
and right now to the present, and maybe the pandemic has made all that even more difficult, because
Mm.
we have different huge serious problems now that in the 70s, of course there was Vietnam, I'm not saying that wasn't a problem,
Mhm.
and there was AIDS in the 80s. There's always a problem, but now we have this to deal with, and I think that will affect generations to come. And I don't, of course, no one knows how, but it affects academic fields as well.
It affects everybody
Yeah.
because Jaron Lanier, who he writes in digital media, but he talks about how like the last music movement was really hip hop, right? Like 20s music didn't sound like 30s music, didn't sound like 40s music, didn't sound like 50s music, didn't sound like 60s music. But most music today sounds like stuff we've heard before, right? So there, except for, hip hop came around in the 70s, 80s, and that's really been the last new kind of music.
Or you
So it feels
chill.
as though we're stuck. What's that?
There's chill on
Yeah.
radio, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, how talented. You get a little box, a computer, and you press a button that does all the instruments for you, and then you have really girl voices.
Girl voices.
Really girly. And you don't have to do anything, and it's really easy. And so,
Right.
I heard an interview with a guy who owns a famous guitar shop in Nashville called Grune's Guitars, and he said that young people aren't even buying guitars anymore because it's too hard to learn how to play a guitar. They just want a box with a bunch of buttons, and that does everything for you.
Yeah.
And so you wonder about the future of popular music. And okay, press a button, boom, you're done. It's easy.
Boom.
It's like what do they say?
Well, then the focus would be on composing. Say it again.
Simple, easy, awesome.
Yeah, simple,
Right.
awesome. Boom, press a button, and boy, doesn't that take talent.
Right.
So I don't know. Anyway,
I think that we're at a time culturally where we've lost a sense of agency, right? Even politically, we don't think we can change things. Zizek talks about how it's easier to imagine for people the end of the world right? You know, zombies, or, you know, something crashing into us, or peak oil, or, you know, climate change. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than maybe changing capitalism a little bit, you know, changing the tax structure a little bit. That's harder to imagine than, you know, cataclysmic end. So we're stuck, I think, you know, in the dream world, we're stuck.
Well,
Not so much in the real world. The real world, of course, we have agency, and we can change things, and we can create a world that we want to create. I mean, it would take sacrifice and solidarity and things that we don't really value these days. But in the real world, we can do it. But, you know, in the dream world, we're kind of stuck.
well, I'm reading a book right now called Shakespeare in the Divided Time.
Mm.
And it talks about the poets and the writers, and particularly the genius of Shakespeare, who actually, you can read him retrospectively and see all our problems.
Mm-hmm.
He had them all. He
It's
had,
circular.
and the solutions. He had, the gender spectrum was wide in Shakespeare. The Ulysses S. Grant, here's a small little factoid that I like to hang on to. Ulysses S. Grant, you might remember the pictures with his beard looking very
Sure.
mannish.
Yeah.
He was an actor. He played, are you ready for this? Female roles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He was a pretty boy.
Is that right?
That's right. And there are pictures of him. He was small. He was 5 foot, maybe 4. And he had a slender build. And when he would take off his beard, they would put dresses on him, and they would say, he's that cutest little man, cutest little girl, cutest little girl. And he played the female parts in Romeo and Juliet. He was Juliet. And
Right.
yes, isn't that? So that's a popper for you. Shakespeare, I think we should all go back and reread Shakespeare, because he's got the answers for so many of our social ills. He's got the replies.
It isn't in the stories, it's in the storytelling that makes him so great, and in the philosophical, political asides that he's able to
Right.
weave into the stories.
And if we know a little bit about the casting, that too is particularly interesting. The writer who wrote this book is a literature scholar, a Shakespeare scholar, and he spent years on this book researching Shakespeare and his referencing to the social ills then, which we are replaying now. The crisis of the white male, and the disconnect between the corporations and the real people, and the poverty at the middle place. It's all there. So interesting. So, in answer to your question, let's go back and read Shakespeare.
Okay. There we go.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing about the myth and how wrong-headed I was when I first began to teach world myth, thinking that I needed to know the plots.
Right.
And I suddenly realized the plots were getting the better of me. I couldn't possibly do it.
Right.
So I came up with
The tale of Genji. Man, that thing goes on forever and ever.
It sure did. I came up with a little acronym, which I think applies to what mythology really is about, and that is connectedness to the natural world, especially relationability, relation, CREEB. Resurrection, a rebirth. Out of death comes life. The cycle there. Think death in a symbolic way, dying to old ideas, or think of my orchid. Dies every year, comes back. Energy exchange between animals, plants, and people.
Yeah.
And then CREEB, balance. And that's where it's not the left against the right. It always has to be left and right.
Yin yang.
Yes.
And yet, this is not the time of balance.
We're out of balance because we're just because,
out of balance.
because
way
we're
out of
doing the
balance.
right versus the left.
Or the Age of Kali Yuga, is that Hinduism?
Yes, it is.
We are living in the Age of Kali Yuga,
And-
which is disaster.
Because we're not remembering
Right.
some of the wisdoms, and you're reading the pre-Socratics and you're reading Plato. They understood things way better than we
Oh,
do.
yeah.
And it's possibly because we get distracted so easily.
Mhm.
Of the pandemic, if I can say such a thing, the time that it's given us is to not live so much in distraction.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some good things that have come out of the pandemic for sure. I've gotten to spend a lot more time with my son than I would have
Yes.
otherwise,
Reading,
which is really nice.
eating out.
Dolphins came back to Venice. But certainly the time has been important time to reflect on things.
If you can do that, that's good. Yes,
Right.
it's enforced.
Right.
Forced reflection, and for me, it's been wonderful in a way, different from Marla's experience with the literal pandemic and the horrors of the disease. But I speak about the falling into this new time zone, which now apparently we're going back to the masks again. So I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we're moving the masks.
Oh, don't worry, they'll come back on.
Oh, because that's a mistake, I think. Well, I don't know if you have any more questions. I just want to read one more thing.
Okay, I want to hear it.
This is a book I was reading quite a while ago. It's a Scottish writer. Who reads Scottish writers? Not too many people.
The Scots?
Yeah, William Burns, and I never read him. But this is
people who drink scotch.
People who drink scotch.
I'm Scotch. Douglas Stewart is a newcomer in the writing field, and he writes about his alcoholic mother and his devotion as a young child to his mother. But the reason I'm talking to you now is not about that, but about something strange I read on page 278 and following. Page 278, just a small thing. They are at a party to celebrate his mother's return. She's no longer a drunk. She's gone through her alcohol AA, and it's a AA party to celebrate her sobriety. And at the party was her what do you call it? A mentor. Agnes cupped the little woman's hand in her own. I've been praying for you. Any luck with your weans, the children? Mary Doll lit up.
What?
You did. I saw it. You just lit up.
What? You read that?
I've never heard.
Is that in the book? It is.
One of Wednesday night.
You're in the book.
Mary Doll. And it's hyphenated. Was small and reed-like, as though the drink had whittled her away like a piece of soft
Good
carving.
Lord, have mercy.
She's in charge of the party. A shadow crossed Mary Doll's face, and then we come across here. She's at this party. Mary Doll crossed the room. Has that ever happened to you?
No.
No. Well, no. The closest thing.
Dan Chapman.
I think there's like
Morris.
those ambulance chasers in Atlanta whose name is Daniel Chapman. And so you see billboards like, oh, Daniel Chapman, he'll save you, whatever.
1-800 Daniel Chapman.
Well, you could go on Facebook and you can see all the different people who have your name,
Yeah.
but I've never seen my name in a novel.
Right. No, I haven't either.
I just had to share that with
You're
you.
famous.
That's great.
And it's hyphenated.
You're a superstar.
So it's just,
Yeah.
There we go. So that was pretty much it.
That's great, though. That's hilarious.
It's hilarious.
No, I have not come across a Daniel Chapman.
Yeah,
in
in
novel.
fiction, and
So,
particularly National Book Award.
So what do you plan on doing with the rest of your life?
So
Because this is the genealogy project where we look not only to the past, the present, but as Bill Piner says, we look also to the progressive movement, which is the future.
I'm trying to find that project. And I think that was a question that I was struggling with as I entered retirement. What will my work be now? And for the first year, my work was memorization. And I'm so fascinated with studying the close reading of Yeats that I probably will write something that nobody will ever read on the process of memorizing
People will read.
studying.
People will read it. People always read me. They don't read me, but they read you.
Oh,
Nobody reads me. They read you.
well, they won't read me once I talk about Yeats. That's
Well,
what
I thought they were going to say they won't read me once they talk about you.
Oh no, I would never say that.
You want to say anything about the Casemore project? I don't know anything. I just heard that it exists.
It does. Brian Casemore, for some reason, took a shine to my book, which has the impossible title. And it's so impossible. I wanted it to be Memories, Dreams, and Reflections.
Okay.
What Carl Jung's autobiography was. And I think there's no law that says you can't have another title.
Right.
So, but Margaret, what's her name? The editor at Rutledge in the old days.
Right.
Yeah, the editor.
Naomi Silverman.
Naomi.
Yeah.
She was afraid that it would be plagiarism, which I assured her it was not. All right, you can find this.
Well, they didn't like it.
So they changed it. Oh, I can't even remember. It's such an awkward title.
Yeah, it's something about self-study.
Yes.
They took all the life out of it.
All the life was taken out of the title.
They do that all the time now. They changed my title to the guidebooks. That wasn't my title.
No, well, it was similar. Right. This was a great long thing with a hyphen, and then it went on using the word mythopoetics, which I think is a clumsy word.
Oh yeah. I remember that book.
It's a clumsy word, and I don't think it really should be in the title. And so it's that book where I was sort of my points on my autobiography, and then referencing more literature. And they took my work and 4 commentators plus Bill Piner, beginning with not Dan Chapman, Brian Casemore and his student, Marilyn Hilarious, which is an interesting name, and Molly Quinn, and Bill Piner's student, Wang Yin, and Bill Piner. And they all wrote commentary on my oddly titled book.
I have it up here now.
Oh, what is it?
The Mythopoetics of Carreri, Memories, Dreams, and Literary Texts about teaching avenues to self-study. Yeah, that's a long one. That's a mouthful.
It is, and it takes the pulp out.
But now they're trying to get everything like, you put it into Google. It's all a Google thing.
Right.
And buzzwords.
Can you put in there so it comes up?
Buzzwords.
Yeah.
They can make money. That's what it is.
It's all corporatization. Yeah. You're so right.
Right.
But these people went ahead and they wrote extensive essays. And then I wrote a comment, and that forms its own new book. And it's called Complications and Threads in Mary Doll's work, or something like that. And it's been accepted.
That's great.
Thank you so much. It's a thrill. And it's very readable. And we had a panel on from the last Triple ACS.
Right.
So you had heard about this, Dan?
Yeah. I don't remember where, who, why now. Okay. Maybe Marla, maybe somewhere else.
Brian Casemore, do you know him?
I know Brian Casemore, yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe he should come. He should come to the collaborative.
He did early on. He came to one or two.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and then I think his personal life kind of.
Yes, it got in the way,
Isn't he an administrator?
and now he's an administrator.
Oh, is he? Okay.
Not one of those, forever jobs where you can't.
Him and Marlowe are always the most fashionable scholars.
Well, that's because we both went to LSU.
Oh, okay.
Ah.
You learned it there.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Fashion makes the scholar, and shoes,
Right.
especially. Wait.
And shoes. Yeah. Oh,
Oh, yes,
please! I can't compete. I
like
can't compete.
Diane von Furstenberg was.
Look, this is what I have.
Oh no!
Oh.
No, Diane von Furstenberg was on TV.
It's very comfortable.
Shoes make the outfit, and I'm like totally agree.
Totally.
Right. Absolutely.
Shoes make the curriculum scholar, the literary critic, or whatever.
Right. All right.
Did you want to say anything, Marla?
I think I've said it all. It's your interview, not mine. I'll tell you, this has been great.
Well, maybe I should say one more thing, because I just remember one of my points. I think one of my interests is to get around the phrase "the law of nature," and it keeps cropping up. It's an old phrase, "the law of nature," as if nature has decided to do opposites. Everything. The law of nature says that men have to marry women and women have to marry men. That's the law of nature.
Oh, that's Aristotle.
It's the law of nature. Aristotle?
Yeah, it's a big mistake.
We're stuck. And that men have dominion over animals.
Oh, that's the Bible.
Right.
Another
But
mistake.
that's so all of these laws that people take seriously because they are flat-minded.
Yeah.
It's what we're up against today.
Well, the scary thing is that there is no law of nature. There's
I know it.
Anything.
There
There isn't.
But they made it up.
Including
and
like
it's
now.
stuck.
Right.
Now they're seeing UFOs. Like we've been seeing UFOs forever.
There's one in
So-
California.
I know it's interesting. I'd like to know what law that.
Oh,
falls under,
I
right?
want to go.
Well, it's very interesting that they're now, what I grew up with as, a sort of crazy conspiracy theory. Now all of a sudden they're all legitimated.
I know.
You
There are
can't
these
deny it
UFOs.
now.
Can't deny it now. Have you seen a UFO? I've never seen a UFO.
I'm waiting.
I remember Dennis Kucinich saw a UFO, and that sort of ruined his presidential bid.
Right.
I mean, not that he had much chance anyways, but they asked him about that on a debate stage, and he had to stumble around a little bit.
And he was gone.
Right.
And I wonder if you remember when Ed Muskie, who was the governor or the senator from Maine, was caught asking about how his wife was. And his wife at the time was just diagnosed with cancer. And he cried.
Oh,
Then he was immediately you can't have somebody to cry.
can't have someone cry. Yeah.
He was gone.
Yeah. So, well, this has been wonderful. I've learned so much.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
All
for the
right.
project. Wonderful that you're doing this. I'm very deeply honored, and I want you to know that.
Yeah. Well,
An honor.
we're honored to have you. That's for sure.
Thank you so much.